On the computer. I think we're live. We are live here recording this conversation with myself, Ian McKenzie, filmmaker, writer, maybe cultural anthropologist, perhaps. I'm trying out a few different these days. Visionary artist. Actually, that's the one I like the most. I'm with my friend Leah Lamb, who is coming from Big Island of Hawaii, I understand. I can hear the animals outside occasionally, enjoying being in warm temperature. I myself am just outside Vancouver on a tiny island. So I feel like we're both, holding down the island vibes between the two of us. And today we're going to be speaking about the role of the conscious creative. I understand. What does it mean to be a conscious creator? As well as speak a little bit about Leah's offering of sacred storytelling and myself, how I've applied myth and storytelling to crowdfunding and to my various film projects as well. So welcome, Leah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Mm-hmm. Would you please begin with speaking about, use this phrase, the conscious creator, I believe, or conscious creative, and I'd love to hear more about what that means to you.
Yeah, I think that as we study the role of the storytellers played such different roles through time. And I feel like one of the defining characteristics of what it means to be a storyteller in our time is the emergence and ever evolutionary process of consciousness. It is what, I think we're part of that bigger story. And because as storytellers, we're shaping the world consciously or unconsciously. And to be a creator, I think we're going to head toward this conversation of what is it to be in the realm of sacred storytelling? What is it to engage consciousness in storytelling? Then I think it also, underneath that, is the question of what are you in service to? Otherwise you'll end up creating anything. Because I think when you step into that creative life force, anything can come through. You'll see the light, you'll see the shadow, you'll see the good, you'll see the dark. And as storytellers, we get to make meaning of it. But when I look at that question of what is it to be a conscious creator, it has all these questions woven into it. Is what am I truly in service to? What am I in service to, helping ground and breathe into and bloom in our planet, knowing that the stories that I create could live far beyond my own lifetime. And who am I in service to? Am I in service to, the unconscious parts of myself, the fear, the doubt, the anxiety, and so do I tell stories of that? To me, that's an unconscious creator. Or am I alive as a human that cannot avoid but feel those things in our times, but consciously say, no, I take a stand for love. No, I take a stand for peace. Or I should be saying, yes, I take a stand for peace. Yes, I take a stand for love. Yes, I want to bring grace to times of fear, so that something else, a possibility and innovation and imagination has a place to live. So in the most esoteric way, I think, when I think about what is it to be a conscious creator, it's that person who looks with wide open eyes at the world, not being a Pollyanna, but alive to the fullness, alive to I know that we are both, scholars in Orphan Wisdom School, alive to the grief, alive to the death, alive to the loss. And being in that being willing to look at everything gives us more life force, more energy, perhaps even more clarity about what role do we want to play and what do we want to be a part of bringing in. And that's kind of how I play. I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. What comes to mind is, if I look out the wider cultural landscape of this moment, it's easy to see that, like, not just mainstream, but any kind of cultural expression, whether it's a TV show, a movie, stories, books, like they enact a certain story, right? Consciously or unconsciously. So they're always enacting some kind of story. And recently I saw the second Avengers movie. Actually, I was coming back on the plane, and it's called Endgame. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that, but it was fascinating to me as a on the one hand, there was like a meta narrative going on about this ultimate war between good and evil, which in a dualistic, it is a dualistic story, and it's not that far, not much digging to get to what feels like a deeply say, Christian theological worldview, which is, ultimately that, say, God is on the good guys and the devil's the bad guys, and the point of the story is to the good to defeat the bad, and then everything will be great.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that enacted over and over again in of course, superhero movies, but almost all like conflict-based narratives in the culture puts forth. And so in that sense, it'd be hard-pressed for me to believe, let's say, that that's consciously going on by, say, Hollywood executives and the whole bit, but more like they're just responding to what feels like, oh, this gets people, in the seats, or this is kind of exciting to have these kinds of narratives. And I feel like it's almost like they're truing their decisions of like, what stories are we creating based on, let's say, things like a market incentive or even like an adolescent worldview of the world. Whereas there's other films that are deeply, profoundly different. I would say like Moana is a really good example, right? Of a film that actually felt like it consciously used a narrative to not just tell a story of female empowerment, with the main subject of Moana, but also like deep kind of mimetic reprogramming around like, what is the nature of evil? I don't want to give any spoilers away, but just this idea that the final bad guy or bad woman is in fact not who, quote, she appears to be, from the narrative of ultimate good versus evil. And that's profound, I feel like, to beginning to implant these stories. So I just feel like, for me, that's what I come to when I think of this idea of like, not sacrificing the power of the story for a kind of, I don't know, kind of on the nose, taking a stand for a different story. Like sometimes, you get a bit of eye rolls when you think of a film or something that is so blatantly pandering to a kind of, we're not like the other stuff, rhetoric. Like it doesn't have a kind of nuance to it, as stories, important stories do. But I feel like there is something really powerful about, willing to consciously understand what kind of stories are you enacting and why, and what are they aligned to. And I hear you saying that what serves life actually is the ultimate kind of orientation, I believe, of that conscious storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you're talking about in terms of really tracking the evolution of our mainstream movies. I actually love seeing all the Marvel and all those movies. I actually feel like it's really important because what they are is a representation to me of what's going on in our collective consciousness. Whether they're created out of the collective consciousness or driving the collective consciousness, I don't know. I think it's probably a very complex, woven, relationship. And I feel like there's two different kinds of things that are happening at once. One is that we have, it's like, because we're in a profit-driven business, there are some people that are like, let's put high energy, low energy. I hate to be that like that, but for the simplicity of conversation. Yeah. And I feel like there's some low energy stories out there that are really on the take, and they're going after. It's like the lowest hanging fruit for how humans are programmed. You used about some of our films are reprogramming us, and those films are like the ones that are just, we walk out of them feeling a little bit dead, a little bit depressed, not believing in good things, and like all the violent films, that are just filling us with all these violent stuff, and yet they're very compelling and kind of fun to watch, and so you're like, what's happening here? And it's like and people are profiting off of that. And then there's these other films that you're talking about, and I'm personally loving tracking the evolution of the villain, because there's some really amazing things happening, as you just spoke to in that film. But also, I felt like the Black Panther was such an amazing film on so many different parts, really good parts. Some things not so good, but whatever. Anyone that's being a leader in that way, you just want to say, Hail Mary, you're thank you for leading the way in this new kind of being. But where I felt like they missed the mark in a way that like broke my heart, because they were so close to a new story, was they repeated the old story again, and they shunned the guy that had been broken, and they put him right into imprisonment. And I was like, oh my God, this is replicating our prison system. I was like, how could we, they were like 3 sentences away from changing the story, and at the last second they just did it. It was the same one, and I was like, okay, we couldn't break out at that point. But then I just saw Aquaman. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see that. And did you see it?
Not yet. No.
It's like they did it. Oh my God. So, it is what it is, right? It's a Marvel, it's what it is. But what they did, and I don't want to be a spoiler alert, is that there was an accountability for the good guy being a part of creating the bad guy. And I was like, whoa, now we're in a new story, that we're all so interrelated, and that monsters are created. We create the monsters around us. And I feel like when we really take accountability into creating the monsters around us, we will shift out of the victim mentality, because all of a sudden we become that much more aware and empowered of how we create the roles that we play, the stories that we live in. I also saw it in another film recently. Oh, well, The Joker. I haven't seen The Joker yet.
No, not yet either, but yeah. That's
but not to be a spoiler, but again, it's another film that's completely committed to how is a monster made. And you can take that in the Marvel films, or you can put it right into our political life, and look at, if we're being so single-mindedly on calling someone a monster, what role are we playing, and how are we part of the problem and part of the system that doesn't allow them to live into the wholeness of what they are, or the wholeness of what they could be. I don't like to say could be, but it's like we give ourselves the ability to say, you're the bad guy, so I don't have to live in that mirror reflection of how that lives in me as well. I'll just put it all on you. So it's it's a way out, I think, when we create monsters.
Yeah, well, beautiful. To segue too, I think that for with this ability to enact or express or program can feel a bit mechanistic, I suppose, but pollinate, that's better. Let's use some plant-based words, but to pollinate these new stories that, we're certainly in a time when with the internet and accessibility to bring stories to a lot of people, and in a way, it doesn't certainly guarantee big audiences, as anybody, putting up a video on YouTube knows, but there's a real possibility, though, of pollinating consciously these new narratives, these new stories. And I feel like part of that is, how I've tracked a lot of my work over the years now. I've been doing film for about a decade, and the one that I first stepped into more of an activist angle, or an activist film, was Occupied Love with director Vilko River. And that was a really profound one. I experienced some mentorship by working with him as a more experienced filmmaker, and how really through the process of actually releasing shorts as well along the way with the movement, that like I did the Revolution of Love with Charles Eisenstein, just a really 4-minute short that I still get people who connect with me, and they're like, oh yeah, you did that thing. And what I thought was profound was some of the people that responded to it after seeing it. I remember one comment was something like, I didn't know why I was occupying until now. Yeah, and I love that as a kind of like, I just reflected, I would say, from a deeper mythic lens, what I was actually seeing, and that connected with people in a much deeper way. And so there's this idea of, in a way, resurrecting or reanimating the mythic imagination, which I think is so important. I think Bly talks about this in Iron John, actually, that particularly in the Western world, that there's been a collapse of the mythic imagination, and in a sense, it's like it's this inability to live mythically, or to see I don't know what to call it, because on one hand it would be easy to feel like, oh, it's just projection on the culture, or maybe false grandiosity, to see oneself as living mythically, for example, especially in a culture now where most people understand myth to mean something that's not true, right? If somebody says, oh, that's not real, that's a myth. That's generally how it's used, right? But I think older cultures, intact cultures, understand myth. This is something Stephen Jenkinson, as well, as you mentioned, we share it as a teacher. But he said one time that something is true because it keeps happening, right? And in that sense, that's a more faithful rendering of what true is, because with these mythic patterns or mythic stories that keep showing up, it's like they in a way provide a more faithful understanding of how to navigate particularly troubled times, because in a way they invite a kind of ability to be with complexity, in a way that isn't often so easily black and white, and being able to see again, like personal responsibility, also collective waves of I don't know, just a different intelligence could emerge. And I'd love to hear your take on that, and particularly
Yeah,
why you've created a program such as, sacred storytelling.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, this thing about our myths, what's coming up for me is I started to feel this grief as you were talking about how we lost our myths, and I remembered, I'm Jewish, but I am a classic tale of lost culture through the coming to this country. And
Mm.
I wasn't part of a Jewish community until I was in my 30s.
Mm.
And I remember someone saying to me, well, you just don't know what you've lost when you've lost it. You don't know how much you've missed. And being like, whatever. And then I started to step into an engaged, unlived Jewish community. And I started seeing children that were raised in that kind of culture and community.
Yeah.
And it's like I could smell the shadow of something, but they were right. I didn't know what I'd missed. And I feel like the same thing with myth, which is that, going back a little bit to what you were just saying in terms of that person who said, I didn't know what I was occupying until I saw your film. As storytellers, we make meaning of the world. That's literally that's at the core of what we're doing. All of those creation stories, as stories told us, they informed us, they instructed us on how to live in the world by giving us some meaning. And right now we're in this information zone, right? And people keep trying to make meaning out of data. We cannot make meaning out of data. We make meaning out of stories. And we're all storytellers, right? And so when someone and some of us have returned to that old right of being human and that old position of saying, right, my part of my gift in the world is being a human and having this thing called language and being able to speak it into the world, and we speak our reality and the codes, the language, it's all crazy, okay? But it's like, when we lose relationship to our language, when we lose relationship to our story, when we've lost relationship to our myths, we've lost our relationship to being creators, we've lost our relationship to godliness, and I think all of the religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. So all the ancient religions agree and give us that age-old wisdom that we hold the keys to creation. So it doesn't matter how you define God or all of this, all those religions give us that clue to why we're here, and that it's through our stories that we create. So that thing of wow, what is it to lose our relationship to myths? I don't know, is the background noise too loud for you?
It's a little
I'm
bit.
just curious.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Fortunately, I can't control that, but we'll keep going. But I think just to lose our relationship to myth, it's like we're losing our relationship to all the gods. I think it was Stephen Jenkinson. We'll just keep referencing him, who does do a great speaking about how language will bring us back to, and when we really understand story and language, if we follow the clues, it'll show us when the separation between humans and the myths and the land happened. And it's all in our stories. So at one point, the ocean was Poseidon. And then Poseidon became king of the ocean.
Yeah.
And that right there is the hint, and it speaks to the separation. So, it's funny because you were referencing, it's like, oh, mythic. Now it's kind of this, I think I was raised to think that it was cheesy. It's like, oh, the fairy people, witches. Oh, that's so corny. That's so weird. That's so blah, blah, blah. And yet there was this part in me that wasn't being expressed in the one dimensionality of what it is to be human at this time. And it was like aching and aching and aching. And then I felt really lucky that I got to attend the 13 Moon Mystery School, where they walked us through the different archetypes. And all of a sudden, for me, that's when it changed. When it wasn't this other thing, it was a more complete and whole embodiment of our wholeness. And so when we have relationship to our mythic selves and our mythic elements in that mythic dimension, which Michael Meade says that behind this dimension is the mythic dimension, we have more access to what we really are as humans, which I think is still a great mystery that's being unsolved in our times.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it makes me think about how this longing or this storied understanding it can, although it can be in a way shamed, right, or kind of shamed or shunned, let's say, out, like as you said, for example, kids maybe are allowed to think these thoughts about that the world is alive and that it has soul and all these things, and then to get to a certain age and it's kind of like, okay, you got to grow up and move into the kind of rational, literal bias that the modern world holds. And I see this parallel between, at the same time, there's this deep popularity of like fantasy and Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and all this stuff, and how it's like all it did was supplant the ability to see the world in the mythic way and to relate to the world mythically. It supplanted it and just means it just pops up somewhere else. In this case, actually under a commodified structure of Hollywood and entertainment, which again is interesting to conceive of how, in a way that that commodifies a mythic relationship with the world, or puts it in a place where access to it is only through commodification, and therefore in the economic. Thinking of Charles, of course, saying that so much of like an indigenous way of relating to the world, and even how giving oneself to the cultural, making culture itself becomes a job, like within an economic system which is constantly overreaching, commodifying more to satisfy the mania of growth at all costs. So it's just fascinating to track, like, that none of these impulses or these longings disappear, but they end up getting subsumed to this commodification engine. And I feel like part of this reclaiming of the ability to think and to speak mythically is also about reclaiming and rebuilding relationship to land, with each other, with this mythic realm.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you were just so beautifully reminded of that piece of it's true if it keeps reoccurring. And that's what we keep seeing. These mythic stories are so popular. Harry Potter, magic, it's so popular because there was a resonance of truth to it. It's like we feel there's magic in the world that we can access, and that landed. It was a resonance that was like, yes, and all these films about good and evil, yes, we are in it right now as a planet. We're obsessed, who's going to win? Luckily, I think all the stories keep saying that the good guys win, but what if that story changes in our collective consciousness? What will that do? So it's like, I feel like it's a great way to track, that war in our consciousness. And I, go back, I'm not of the Scottish, Irish, people, but I know that their relationship to the land and the fairies and little people, that's still alive, And one of the reasons why I love coming to Hawaii is because of Polynesian culture. They fought to keep it alive, and were able to in ways that other indigenous cultures weren't able to. And to me, what's really different about certain parts of this land is I'll go to certain places and I'll never forget this one place in Maui. I went in and I was like, wow, this land feels really different. And I kept like feeling into it. And I was like, it feels so different. And I was like, it's never lost its relationships with human. The mana, the life force, it was used to talking out loud and being listened to. And as someone who is still developing and learning, it's like I couldn't, even if I didn't know how to understand it exactly, I could sense that energy was still alive. And it's because the relationship between humans and the land has been established and maintained. And that's part of like the myths are still alive. They it's like when you look at the fight in terms of the protectors that's happening on Mauna Kea right now on the Big Island, it's because all of the Hawaiians, from all the different islands see this one mountain as being a key to their lives. And to the mythos of that mountain. And that story is not some fantasy or fiction. It's real. Same thing with the taro plant. They fought for it not to be genetically modified because to them the taro is their, I think it's a relative in the family. It's not this conceptual concept of spirit of taro. No, it's like it's an actual relative. So there are places, where as storytellers, the more that we can carry these stories that have been shunned and put in the corners, we can give them more and more places to live. And then they have more and more resonance in the world, and more and more people be like, yeah, you know what? Maybe talking to plants isn't such a weird thing after all. Maybe that's actually real, and that I can take a step back. I believe it was Descartes that was the one that was real separating and did probably the most amount of damage between humans and animals, is seeing everything having a life. And he was the one that really said, no, humans have this advanced intelligence, nothing else is like us. So it's like, can we just realize that was just a story, just like everything else, and put it in the same kind of category and not give it the leading headline as true, because it doesn't feel so true anymore.
And you could say the consequence of living that story has become apparent, right? As we sit at the precipice of biospheric collapse and catastrophe. So I would say that being able to enact and to live and to speak and to serve new stories that are actually more life affirming is a deeply political act in this time as well. And I'd love to make a little segue now to one. I could speak a little bit about how I've used story and myth in a lot of the crowdfunding that I've done. I just want to touch on it briefly, but just to say that as a filmmaker the last decade, I've pretty much used crowdfunding for all of my films at one point. And I've consulted on many, many other projects, maybe 40 or 50 at this point. I think through my own explorations and also reading Joseph Campbell and people like Jonah Sachs, he was the co-founder of Free Range Studios. He wrote the book Winning the Story Wars, and just a lot of other influences that I brought to bear upon understanding crowdfunding campaigns as a place to use myth, or to harness myth and to articulate campaigns from a mythic perspective. And it's been, I think, really helpful for a lot of people to be able to see, how their project, whether it's a film or not, really is in service to to a particular myth or to a particular story that's trying to live through them, and to get to the base level of finding out, like, what are the values they're actually enacting within that story? Like, what's the, Jonah Sachs talks about the moral often that accompanied stories. And sometimes that can feel a bit simplistic, as if stories themselves have a kind of core essence, that's the point, and I'm a bit wary myself of this idea that stories, in a way, it's like that the point is the essence, and then once you get the essence, everything else is kind of extraneous. Like, I think there's something actually like any living thing. It's not like the point of it is the nugget, and everything else. It's like saying, you who you are as a human do you have like one important piece of you, and then everything else is kind of extraneous. It's like you and your totality are who, the magic of who someone is. And so in the same way, I think stories are like these beings, these organisms that are actually they're alive in the same way that any other being would be. So I've used that in crowdfunding a lot and been very successful with my campaigns and others. And this conversation as well, I'm going to share on my online crowdfunding course, in which I've put a lot of what I've learned. It's called The Art of Crowdfunding for Social Change. Online, it's on Udemy, if I'm saying that right. Links will be in the comments if people want to check it out. And I'd love to just ask you or share a little bit about, you have an online course, which has been, I think, many years in evolution, and called Speak the Spark. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, and how you really feel, why you feel this is actually like what I think is a core offering now for you, right? Of like your life's mission in a way.
Yeah. And also I will just give like 3 thumbs up to anyone that wants to learn about crowdfunding, and you as a real visionary facilitator and teacher in the breadth of what it is, because I remember we got to have a talk about crowdfunding back in the day when I did an online course about it. And I so appreciate that you've committed yourself to really teaching people the complexity of what it is, and the kind of the secret sauce of the generosity that's required in it. And I really appreciate this added piece around helping people understand their role as storytellers and story. And that piece that you just said about it being alive, I've been creating Speak the Spark, Sacred Storytelling for New Paradigm. It's this online course for the past 3 years. And so it catapulted me out of the role of just creator and into this person that is actively carving a path for other people to follow. And granted, I'm following the path of, others, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Joseph Campbell, James Hillman, there's like, Robert Bly. I mean, people have been carving this path and putting Michael Mead, Stephen Jenkins, they've been, I'm just one of them. Carolyn Casey, it's like, there's so many people down the road that who I'm following. But there's this place of like, right, how do you make sure that there's a path wide enough for all people, no matter where they are, to follow it, and it put me in this deep process of, it's one thing to be a creator. It's a whole other thing to be able to teach people how to access that in themselves. Those are actually two different skills, is what I really understood. When I grew up in the professional world of theater, I did not respect my teachers. I was a protege, young, raw talent. And I've thought that anyone who was teaching couldn't do it themselves. I was such a little snot. So much to learn. and there's some truth in some of that, yes. But then what I understand now is that then there's other people who walk the path of mastery. And I think that, as Maya Angelou said, one of our roles is like, once you've opened the door to do it, then show other people too. Her quote is far more eloquent than what I just said. And I started seeing stories as living beings, as what is it to be in a sacred storyteller? It's to be in relationship with a story that holds the divine in it. And what does the divine do? That it has a commitment to supporting life on earth, just as you said earlier. And I was really embarrassed to like say that out loud, because again, it sounded so woo-woo and all that. And then I heard Charles Eisenstein say it. And I was like, well, if he can say it, I can say it. And it's that, again, it's that collaborative thing. So I absolutely love this school. It is my heart, walking outside of me. And when I looked at our world and I looked at what I'm in service to, and I realized, hey, we need, I don't like using this word, but like, we need an army of ambassadors of love, peace, grace, all of it, and it's like, and people are emerging. And I feel like a lot of people are feeling the call, and they understand that it's connected to their voice, and they understand it's connected to their story. And yet there's this little piece that's missing. And I started to, after I got to study with a couple of masters, I was like, oh, I can see it. I can see the puzzle pieces. And I really knew and felt that we are going towards, we are in the middle of a great transition time on the planet. And there's extraordinary opportunity to examine the systems that aren't working, and to hone the systems and create the systems that we most want to thrive in. It's like we can think about it in a way that we've never been able to think about it, and strategize where we've never been able to strategize. And there's village making skills that we are remembering and relearning and refining and redeveloping. And to me, story is actually at the center of that. And also bringing in and giving people access to master teachers who understand language and etymology and vision stories. And I just, it's like, to me, it was so important to give people all the access that they could get to the wisdom that is here, and then also to create a library. So that's one of the things that I'm actually really proud about. We have an amazing library of Charles Eisenstein, of Michael Mead, of Stephen Dickinson, and then this year, basically I just get to invite my heroes, and they keep saying yes, so Caroline Casey inviting us to see her, Starhawk, a leader in creating vision stories for a future that we want to live in, and who's walking the talk in the physical world and in the storied world. So I could go on. Dina Metzger, I'm obviously really excited about it. Let's speakthespark.com. And we just started, our first welcome session just happened. I bring people in groups of 10 people at a time, so I can really get to hear from everybody. But our first master class is with Starhawk on November 5th. And then I do let people have a rolling admission until the very end of November, early December, because that's about as much as you can get. You can miss the first 2 classes and catch up and then join us in the third. But the earlier you come in, the richer the experience, because we've started. And there's people from Australia and New Zealand and China. And it's like to get to hear stories and rhythm and pattern from all these different places. To me, it's really satiating. So,
wow. And that's speakthespark.com, yeah? People can find out more about that. Awesome. I feel like, we could probably wind it now to a close, with this. I feel, we could go on for a long time. I
think we covered some territory.
Yeah, we hit some bases. And so that's speakspark.com. If people want to check out my crowdfunding, you can go to theartofcrowdfunding.com. or in the show notes. We have a show now, and this conversation notes. I'll put the links to the programs into Speak the Spark as well. And yeah, I'm just so appreciative of the ability to share a conversation like this. And I mean, it really does highlight for me this yeah, like a reawakening of this mythic imagination, this mythic lens, which in some ways, again, is, I feel like, the seedlings that are emerging from essentially, all of the stories that are no longer true. And by that meaning, they're no longer true because we now see their consequence, right? We see them now burning down, literally. The fires are raging in many places, around the world now. And so we definitely need these new stories that are like the water to quench fires that, become out of balance. So I see in some ways that we are sort of bringing or attempting to bring nourishment, and quench the thirst actually that people have for meaning, and that the stories can bring that, not as a way of like fixing things, like in a sense of, I see they're not like a savior. Of course, even the story of the savior is a great story, and in that it's one of the most, certainly in the Western world, one of the most compelling stories that we have. And at the same time, yeah, I feel like this is the moment for these new and ancient stories to reemerge again, in this next iteration around the spiral. And what a time to be alive right now. So thank you for doing your contribution to this emergence, and all the listeners too, who are really willing to say yes to engage with these times.
It was so beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you for all that you're doing. I love your films. I love watching. I know that you've got a new one that's going to be coming out soon, I think.
Yeah. So that'll be probably spring. Yeah. Feature documentaries take forever. But that's Love School, which is about Tamara, actually, what their incredible work with living and creating a whole new culture, really around reconnecting to source again, to Eros, the source of life. And yeah, that's Love School. People want to check it out, loveschoolfilm.com. And yeah, more to come. So thanks for the time. Yeah. Enjoy the Big Island out there, and yeah, to be continued.
Okay, take good care.